What's going on, everybody? My name is Curci, and this is a review for The Outer Worlds. But before we get into this review and what I think about The Outer Worlds, I would like to remind everybody to please give this video a like. It helps out tremendously, and I would really appreciate it. Also, I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you can be notified of all new video uploads. And with all of that said, let's talk about The Outer Worlds. So what is Outer Worlds? Outer Worlds is a game that was developed by Obsidian. You might recognize Obsidian from some other titles such as Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords, and Fallout New Vegas. And you can definitely see a little bit of the inspiration from some of the things that Obsidian has done in the past within the Outer Worlds. Outer Worlds feels like Fallout mixed with Borderlands with a little sprinkling of KOTOR on top. So the game plays and feels a lot like a Fallout game. It has the atmosphere of a Borderland game, not taking itself too seriously. It's a little jokey, a little sarcastic, but there's also companions that you can recruit to be on your crew. You can do quests for them, and you can have them with you when you go out and do missions, which is the sprinkling of KOTOR I was talking about. It's like Fallout and Borderlands got married, they had a baby, and then when the baby was about like 7 or 8, they got divorced, and then the mom Fallout starting to see this other person, which was KOTOR, and you start to see a little bit of influence from your mom's boyfriend, and that's what this game ended up being. It was a very specific example. But because this game feels like hodgepodge of different things that you've likely played before, in that it doesn't feel unique. So even though it is technically an original IP, it just feels like a game that you've already played, even though it's not. It's not unique enough to be really noteworthy. Now, the story of The Outer Worlds is that you play as a character who came from Earth, decided to leave Earth to colonize a new system known as the Halcyon system. So you were one of thousands of people that boarded on the colony ship known as the Hope, who also had the same idea of leaving Earth to pursue a brand new life for themselves in the Halcyon system. But the problem is that the trip from Earth to Halcyon will take years, so you and your fellow colonists are frozen so that the trip feels like only a few minutes for you. As you get frozen, then unfrozen, then boom, you are where you need to be. But on the way to Halcyon, the Hope got lost and no one knew where it was for 70 years, except maybe they did know where it was and they were just ignoring it. And so enter Dr. Phineas Wells, who goes to the Hope. He rescues you in an effort to eventually rescue everybody else on the Hope. And so that's what this game is. So now that you're awake, you explore the Halcyon system and learn that it is run by big corporations. And this is where the Borderlands sarcasticness comes in, where the game almost feels like a parody of real life corporations, because everything is so exaggerated. Characters will talk about making paperwork for paperwork and making requests that will take years. For example, you have to get this thing, so you have to go to this place, and then when you talk to the NPC at that place and it's like, hey, I need this thing, they're like,
oh, I'd have to submit a request for a release form and then wait for a receipt for my request of a release form. Then you'd have to make an appointment. Couldn't say. We've got a backlog, and I'm planning on retiring in the next 35 years, but I could give my successor a memo on your behalf.
That's how exaggerated this world is, and that's where a lot of the Borderlands stuff, I feel, comes in. Not to say that Borderlands was run by companies, I'm just saying, like, the jokey side of this game, the fact that it doesn't take itself too seriously, that's the Borderlands feel that I'm talking about. But in essence, this is a role-playing game, not just in the sense of you get to spec your character, you get to spec what kind of armor that they're gonna wear, what kind of weapons do they use, what do they specialize in terms of, are they specializing in hacking, in lockpicking, in heavy weapons. But it is also a role-playing game in the sense that you make your own choices as far as how the story plays out. So even though Phineas Wells rescues you and says, hey, I need you to help me save the colony from these corporations that are kind of running it into the ground, you ultimately can throw him under the bus and start working for the corporations. Now, most characters in this game are going to be exaggerated. One of the first areas that you reach in the game is this town known as Edgewater. And you learn that Edgewater is more or less centered around this tuna factory, because that's how it makes its money. And it's owned by a company that sells a lot of that tuna. And it's run by a guy that is a very corporate person. And company policy states that since the town's bread and butter is the selling of this tuna, that the only thing that the people who are in the town are allowed to eat is the tuna. But of course, if you ever eat tuna for that long, you end up getting sick. And so that's what ends up happening in this town. So people start getting sick, and the guy running it is just like, oh, it's a plague, without really reading the writing on the wall that they're getting sick because they're eating so much tuna. But company policy states that you have to eat the tuna, and so that's what they're doing. Like, that's so stupid, but that's what this game is. And so you see a lot of instances where that comes into play. So a lot of the side NPCs are going to be that. Like, there's one chef who just complains about being a chef the whole time. Like, he hates being there, he hates where he is. But a lot of the story characters are going to be a little bit more serious. They're going to take their serious tones. Every once in a while, you're going to find one that has like a stick up their ass, but most of the time, some of these characters like Phineas is going to make a joke every once in a while, but at least what he's trying to accomplish is relatively serious in tone. This game knows when to make its jokes, but it also knows when to pull it back and be slightly more serious. But the characters, for the most part, are relatively unremarkable, which includes a lot of the party members. Some of the party members that are in your party, I feel like, are not the best characters in this game. There are a couple of standouts, some you might gravitate toward more than others, but for the most part, they are relatively one-noted, pretty flat. I feel like a game that takes inspiration from something like KOTOR. The developer of this game did develop a KOTOR game that maybe they would put a little bit more value in the characters. I just felt like the characters were underwhelming. I wasn't blown away. I didn't feel any real connection. If any of them died, I would have been like, okay. In fact, some of them asked to join my party, and I was like, why? As far as the overall story, I feel like it was relatively unremarkable. There were no crazy twists or turns. It was just kind of going on its path, and it stuck to that path. It might have deviated a little bit where it explains a lot more of why you're doing things that you're doing, but it doesn't really get crazy with it. This game doesn't really have, outside of like, okay, the big corporations are the villain, and yeah, there is a specific character that can be perceived as the villain, but that character doesn't get really any screen time, so it's like it misses the villain aspect. I feel like there's no villain in this game, but the story it tells is okay. I mean, it's fine. I feel like the game gets better play with the smaller stories that it tells, with some of the quests that you can do. And so when you're going through the story missions, there are moments where you'll go to a planet and the story missions that are relevant to that planet are pretty compelling. For example, you might go to this planet and you discover that there is a organization that is running the first town you go to, and then as you explore the area, you discover the rival faction, and maybe you can find a way to have them join forces, or you pick one or the other. And I think that in a couple of instances, those are pretty compelling stories that are contained. They don't really kind of branch out to the overall story that the game is telling, but as far as the story of that planet and the struggles that that planet is going through, I feel is slightly more compelling than the overall story itself. Even the side quests may even have some better storylines than the overall story. Like, there's one quest where you discover that this worker has been missing. He hasn't reported to work in a while, so you kind of investigate a little bit and you discover that he's kind of gone out into the wilderness, and then you realize like, oh crap, he got eaten by cannibals. Which is interesting because as you're messing around in that town, you are learning about the world beyond the walls of the town, and you are hearing these horror stories of what is out there, so that when you go out there and you immediately find like, oh crap, there are cannibals. I wish that the game had more of that. Like, I would say this, that once you go out into the world, I wish it was more full. There are no random events to speak of, and this game is open world-esque, where it's not as massive as saying Grand Theft Auto 5 or Fallout or an Elder Scrolls game. As you go from planet to planet, it has like these smaller open worlds that you can run around and have fun in, and so you can fight creatures and marauders as you're going from point A to point B. But there is nothing along the side of random events. I think that maybe once or twice I encountered a character that might have introduced the quest line while I was out in the wilderness. Maybe not, because I don't really remember. I feel like I might have strolled into a town that started introducing quests to me rather than being out in the wilderness and getting introduced to a quest. Like, there was one time where I was following along the storyline path and I encountered a character that it felt like it had no relevance to the story. So technically speaking, I encountered this character out of nowhere, but because I was doing a story mission, I feel like I would have encountered that character anyway. So it feels more like a scripted encounter. There's nothing along the side of random events. There's no character who's getting attacked by these crazy monsters, and when I save him, he's like, oh man, thanks for saving me. Here's some bits, which is the game's currency. I feel like this world, it's not as full as I would have liked it to be. It's not as lively as I would have liked it to be, especially since, as far as I'm aware, the enemies don't respawn. So once you kill a lot of the enemies in an area, there's nothing for you to go through once you come back to that area. If I leave a planet, then come back, all the enemies should have respawned. I can understand that if I'm on the planet and I've been there and I haven't left the planet, that as I'm clearing out these areas and killing these enemies, that they don't respawn. But I remember encountering encampments where there were marauders and gunning them down in the beginning of the game, then not coming back to that planet until later, and that camp has still been cleared out. So really, the game doesn't feel like it's giving me any incentive to want to walk in the world. One of the things that I like that open world games do is that it fills the world with random events and creatures for you to fight. Like, for example, Skyrim. I don't fast travel in Skyrim. I like going through and encountering random events, but not only that, occasionally a dragon will show up and I'll have to fight the dragon. But you miss those encounters if you just fast travel from point A to point B, whereas in this game, because you're clearing out all these enemies, and most of the enemies are not that challenging, but we'll talk about that in a moment, but they don't respawn. So it's not like I can grind out and get better levels by not fast traveling. Once I've gone from point A to point B, I might as well just fast travel from point A to point B. I'm not going to encounter anything new. So really, as you're walking around in the world, you're only going from point A to point B, which is whatever quest you happen to be on. And so I do the thing that I often do with open world games, is that once I hit a city or something that might have a lot of different quests, I'll run around and I'll talk to everybody and I'll try to get as many quests as I can get. And then I will start to plot out my path of like, okay, well, I need to complete this quest, which is there. Then I'll go to that one. Then I'll go to that one. And you start to plot out your route. And so as you are in that smaller world, you're just running from point A to point B, completing all those different types of quests. Let's talk about the gameplay and how this game plays. This game feels like a Fallout game more than any other game. The way the combat works, the way you navigate, the way you pick up items, it feels so much like a Fallout game. I mean, it even has a VATS-like system where you're able to slow down time to get precise shots. So you have this ability that is known as time dilation, which is a side effect of being frozen after so long. So you're able to slow down time so you can be super precise with where your shots go. And most of the time you're just gonna pop the enemy in its head. But depending on what body part you hit could give you a specific bonus. You could, if you hit them in the head, you could blind them. If you hit them in the leg, you could stagger them. Basically, it's not so much you're controlling time as much as your reflexes are just crazy good. But earlier I talked about the lack of challenge that this game has, and I'll tell you right now, this game is not that challenging. Most of the enemies that you face are gonna be pushovers. The way I spec my character is that I kind of favored ranged weaponry. So it was long weapons and heavy weapons. So basically I would pop you from a distance, and if you happen to get close, I'll whip out my machine gun and just melt you. And so enemies didn't really feel like a threat, no matter how big they were, no matter how much they got built up. Like for example, there is a quest that you go on, and there are these things called companion quests. Some companions will ask you to do certain things for them, and most of them are multi-stepped. And I don't know if that's gonna have an impact. Maybe if you choose not to do that companion quest, that maybe during the end mission, when you all gather around a table, hey, I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna do this thing, are you guys with me? Maybe if you don't do that companion quest, they don't go with you. I don't know that because I did all the companion quests, so they all went with me. But there's one companion quest where you are basically building up to fighting this big monster. But the problem is that if you've already been running around that world, you've faced that type of creature before. And not for nothing, but you've also completely wiped the floor with that creature, because this game is pretty easy. And so once you get to the point where you are facing that creature, I expected it to be a lot bigger because it was now a unique encounter, but it really wasn't. It was the same size as the rest of them. It had the same name, except it had the word mega in front of it. But for me, I was just this killing machine. It was like, but I'll still mow you down. And I did. In fact, there were multiple times in this game where I just straight up forgot I had the ability to heal. The game actually conditioned me, because it was so easy, to not monitor my health all the time. And so every once in a while I would look up and I would be like, oh my God, I'm almost dead. But then the battle's already over. I don't feel the need to monitor it. The only time I felt the need to really take a look at my health, watch what I was doing, be careful where I was positioned and who I was attacking, was during the final mission, where all of a sudden the game jumped up in difficulty and these enemies had unique weapons and unique type of damage. They would also swarm on you. It suddenly got challenging for the final mission where everything got scaled up to endgame. And I was like, where was this for the majority of the game? And also enemies don't scale with you. So if you happen to go back to previous planets, they stay how easy they were at the start of the game. So when you shoot them with your super modified weapon, which by the way, you can find workbenches out in the world and add modifications to your weapon. So you can add like a scope or change the type of damage that it does. You can also just tinker with it to just make it do more damage. You can do the same thing to armor, and also you can manage the type of armor that you have. But once you go back to these worlds that you encountered at the start of the game with your beefed up weapon, most of the time you're going to see an enemy and you're like, pop. Okay, well, glad to see that you guys are as much of a pushover as you were when I first encountered you. Now, like I said, one of the things that you can do is you can have companions out with you on missions. Sometimes they're going to have unique dialogue for the situation you're in. Sometimes they're going to have a little bit of an input depending on the conversation that you're in. They might have some unique things to add or some unique perspectives. They're going to offer their opinions before you make a choice. But they also have their own special ability. If you hit either left or right on the D-pad, you will have that person use their special ability. And sometimes when things get a little hairy where you're like, oh crap, I am actually almost dead, so I need to go take cover, I need to heal, the few times that I actually had to heal. And so some companion abilities actually will knock down an enemy. So it's like, all right, dude, just use your shotgun and blast that guy. Or hey, you use your hammer and smash that that guy, make him fall over. So they're super useful when you're in a very hairy situation. They were very useful during the final mission of the game, where it's like, oh my god, I'm reloading, but I need someone else to deal damage to this character, so you use your machine gun and just blast them. So it helps, but ultimately it doesn't feel that impactful. Speaking of things that don't feel that impactful, I talk about how you can spec your character a certain way. Most of the time, I feel like you get your character to a point where they could do almost everything if you just spread them out. It didn't feel like you have to spec a certain way, and therefore you can only do a certain thing, and so you need the specific character to be there to do the thing that you can't do. I spec my character in a way where it was like, oh, I need to hack this computer, or oh, I need to pick this lock. Done. Every once in a while, I'd find somewhere I'm like, I can't pick that lock. I guess I just won't go through that door. But perks are also in this game as well. So every 2 levels, you get the ability to spend a point for a perk, and a lot of these perks are pretty useless. One perk is like, yeah, you can walk 20% faster. I'm like, cool. Do I really care about walking 20% faster? I like scan through most of them, and it's like, I don't really care about most of this stuff. It was like, one is like, your time dilation will last longer. And I'm like, I don't use my time dilation that much. Do I really need it to last longer? I just use it to pop a headshot and then that's it. But there's a mechanic in this game as well, and I feel like it was the most useless system that they put into this game, which is that as you go through and you encounter enemies and you do certain things, the game will start to analyze potential weaknesses that your character has. For example, if you face a specific type of enemy so many times, the game might turn around and go, oh, we believe that you might have a fear of those creatures. So when you fight these creatures, they will do additional damage to you. But if you accept this weakness, we'll give you another perk. And I was like, why? First of all, your perks aren't that good. If you really wanted me to consider the option of using and accepting these weaknesses, then make your perks worth it. Why would I accept a weakness just to get a perk that I don't need anyway? So every time that popped up, it was like, oh, we think we found another weakness. I'm like, cool, I don't care.
I don't have such weaknesses.
It was unique, and it would have been better if the game had the perk system be better. Make really good perks. A lot of times I was like, oh, I got a perk. I guess I'll spend it on something. Eventually got to a point where I was like, nah, that one. I didn't really put that much thought into the perks that I was getting. The only ones that I really wanted was anything that was going to boost my damage, boost my health, and there were only like 2 of those, so I'm like, what do I care? I don't know. I feel like this game could have been harder, and it makes me regret that I chose the difficulty that I chose. This just happened to be what it was hovered over when I hit new game, which is what I do for most games. When I pick up a game and I start it up, whatever the setting of difficulty it happens to be hovered over when I start it up, that's the one I'm gonna pick, because I'm like, oh, the developers are telling me pick that one. So most of the time I just pick normal because I don't often want to have a hard experience. And keep in mind, I just came off of Bloodborne, so it was like, I don't want to go from Bloodborne into another hard game, which, by the way, my friend actually recommended this game, which is why I started playing it. And she was saying that it has a game mode that is hard, but also introduces survival elements. So you have to eat, you have to sleep, and your autosaves are limited. I don't really know what that means. I don't know if you have like a limited number of autosaves, but it's not like you can choose to autosave. So I assume they took a lot of things that would normally autosave out. And it was like, I don't want to go from one super difficult game into another. And also, and this is one of the things that I don't like that video games do. Like, I love survival elements. What I don't like is when games that are not centered around the survival element that then try to put a survival element in it. Like, if I'm going to play a game like Subnautica or Minecraft, like, there's a survival element that is centered to that game. For a game like The Outer Worlds, where the game is meant to be a role-playing, go and shoot monsters game, it's not meant to be a survival game. So it was almost like it's adding more challenge unnecessarily. And so I was like, I'm not going to do that. And I think that was like Supernova. But I do wish that I had played this game on hard, because I feel like that's where it would have given me the challenge that I was missing. Like, this game was just too easy, and I might have just made it too easy for myself by not choosing hard. I don't know. I just wanted an easier game. I wanted a game that didn't require me to think that much on while playing it after I just played a From Software game. But at the end of the day, it was like, well, that was too easy. Like, kill me a couple times, knock me down once or twice. Now, I'm going to introduce a brand new thing, which is my recommendation meter, which will be right down below me somewhere. So it's going to have like 5 different settings. Don't play, which is like, this is the worst thing ever, don't play this game. It'll have not great, but, which is to say that, this game isn't that great, but it has this and this. Then there's it's okay, which is like, it just kind of sits in the middle where there's a significant amount of things that I didn't like, but also some stuff that I did. Then there's it's good, a game that I really enjoyed but might not be for everyone, and then must play. Most of these things are probably going to come with a little bit of a caveat where, like, I would consider Bloodborne as a must play game, but only for people that understand the kind of game that they're getting into. So where would I rank The Outer Worlds? I'm going to rank it right in the middle of it's okay. Mainly because I was disappointed with the lack of challenge, which I understand I can fix on my own by just playing at a harder difficulty. But I felt like the story was relatively underwhelming, the characters were underwhelming, the game didn't feel that unique, but there was still a decent amount of fun to be had. When I got sucked into this game, but there was never a point where I had trouble putting it down, and it would actually take a couple of days for me to pick it back up again. So it wasn't the kind of experience that made me feel like I wanted to play this game at all times. I mean, once I was in. I was playing for a few hours. But once I had put it down, it was like I had to mentally get myself to a point where I was like, all right, I should probably play Outer Worlds. I'll put it down on it's okay. If you enjoy a game that plays like Fallout, but it's not a Fallout game, it has the Borderlands atmosphere with a little sprinkling of KOTOR, that's this game. I'm trying to think of like, where's the bright spot that this game has? Because sometimes it's like, this game tells an amazing story or it has amazing gameplay and this is why you should play it. But I feel like Outer Worlds was kind of jack of all trades, but master of none. So it was just kind of, you know, it was what it was. Like, I don't think it was super awesome. I don't think it was terrible. It was just okay. But that is my thoughts on The Outer World. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like. That helps out tremendously. Comment below what you thought of Outer Worlds, if you played it, if you even consider playing it. Just comment below your thoughts. Consider subscribing to the channel. Hit the bell icon so you can be notified of all new video uploads, and check out one of these other recommended videos over here to the side. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time.